today we begin with some questions. As we launch ourselves into this community activity of spirit groups, we're going to explore the book that will be our instructional piece during this work together, Discover the Power Within You by Eric Butterworth. And he poses some interesting questions in his original foreword to the book when it was published 40 years ago. One of which is, what did Jesus really teach? And what does the Bible, that dusty tome compiled over around 2,000 years ago, or recording the history of 2,000 years ago, what does that have to teach us about who we are and what we're about here in this life, here in 2021? I'm still getting used to saying that, 2021. And how can we make that a tool that's alive for us in our own spiritual growth? Well, I'm glad to report that the messages, the teachings that were based on the life and the example of Jesus Christ are as transforming today as they were in his lifetime. So imagine this, that we are the people who are sitting at his feet, that we throng when he gathers to talk to the crowd, and we are changed just as lives were in that long ago history. His central message was what has become the basic principle of our unity movement, the divinity of humankind. Jesus discovered his own divinity, and he knew that what God had done, God can do. That what was true of him must potentially be true for us. These are words of Eric Butterworth. We simply need to grasp this great truth in our own life, get it from our head, which is usually where we acquire thinking first, and shift it down so that it is centered in our heart, in our very being, and becomes our GPS system for how we find the map coordinates of God at the point of you, God at the point of me. Think of that little Google map dot thing that you click on when you want to find something in a Google search. That can indicate God at the point of you, because that's where God gets into the world, is through us, through our life, through our activity, through our willingness to recognize this great truth that there is only one presence, and we are the emanating activity of that presence in the world. Now, Eric Butterworth, especially in this book, Discover the Power Within You, spoke to these great truths, profound truths, and profoundly simple truths at their basis. And why would we listen to Eric Butterworth, you might ask? Well, I thought about simply reading the foreword to the book that he wrote, because it was just so clear about the message that this book can put in our hands, this truth of who we are and our relationship to God and how that moves us successfully in our life. But I actually chose to read a portion of the foreword that was written on the 40th anniversary of the publishing of the book, the foreword that was written by Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou met Eric Butterworth in 1955, and she called him her living teacher. And she has been a student of unity ever since that time. If you want to know more, just Google Maya Angelou and unity, and you'll find videos, you'll find her written word and messages about the unity movement. You'll find her depth of understanding these truths for her own self and how they have equipped her to live an abundant life. So some of what Maya said in that forward statement is that Butterworth was a 20th century Emerson. His mission was to help others realize their spiritual potential and to empower the world through spiritual growth. His teachings focused on what a human being is and what a human being can do to live abundantly. What I found to be so compelling in Butterworth's teachings, and still do, is that the power of God, the essential spirit, is within each of us. We could ignore that, or we can draw upon it and decide to grow. We can heal ourselves. For me, the consciousness of our divine potential that Butterworth describes begins with prayer, begins with meditation. But this power becomes most effective when it becomes unconscious in us or subconscious. When this happens, people do exactly what they know to do, not what they think they know, not what other people say they should know, but what they know becomes the basis of their life. With this new consciousness, change becomes automatic. We are transformed so that you don't have to think about it. It is already in you so firmly, so securely, that you automatically go to the positive thought and act upon it. That's God alive at the point of view in this world and in your life. What we know is that this work is the deepest that we will uncover in ourselves. And at the same time, we uncover some basic principles that allow us to live the abundant life, allow us to live successfully, actively connected to God. And Butterworth encapsulates them in three basic ideas. The first is the omnipresence of God. So we're going to explore some of these key ideas today. There was an unknown someone who once said, if you aren't as close to God as you once were, don't make the mistake about which one of you has moved. That little pin dot, that's not moving. If you can see the shadow on the illustration that was up there on the title slide, it's a pin dot with a shadow. So that was my idea of representing God and you, connected, reflected, moving together, identifying that activity of God. Where it rests in the world is right here in each one of us. And this idea, sometimes we act as if we think God is lost. Or do you remember the movement in the 60s and 70s, God is dead? It was a Nietzsche idea. I wasn't actually paying attention to a lot of key philosophers in grade school, but I did hear about that one concept because I was in church at the time. It was popularized, but it just does not hold truth when you have come to experience God alive at the point of view. I want to share a story that illustrates why we seem to struggle with this idea of the omnipresence of God, which is God is everywhere present. There is no place, there is no spot in my life, there is no spot in the world, there is no person, no condition, no circumstance where God is not present. Sometimes the truth of that statement, there is only one presence and one power active in my life and in the universe, escapes us in what that means in action. It means that whatever is going on in the midst of you, in the midst of your life, your circumstances, do not forget that God is right there at the point of view. But we make up that idea that God has moved rather than ourselves. There was a Hindu legend about a legend about a time when all humans were gods. But they abused that sense of divinity in themselves. So Brahma, the chief god, well, he called a council together of those who still had their divinity present, and he said, I've decided to take divinity away from mankind and hide it where they would never find it. So let's have a plan. Where are we going to hide the divinity of man? And one of them said, well, let's bury it deep in the earth. But Brahma said, no. That just doesn't seem like that'll work, because one day they will dig down deep in the earth and they'll find it. And another of the gods said, well, let's put it at the deepest depths of the ocean. And Brahma said, no, I don't think that'll quite work either, because someday man will learn to be in water and find the depths of the ocean to discover it. And then another said, let's take it to the top of the highest mountain and hide it there. But Brahma understood mankind and knew that they would eventually climb every mountain, and so they would discover it. Someday they'd find it. Well, the Council of Gods gave up and said, we do not know where to hide this gift of man. And it seems there's no place on the earth, in the sea, where humans would not eventually find their own divinity. Brahma thought for a long time, and his response was, I think I know what we'll do. We'll hide it deep inside of humans, inside their own being. They'll search the world over, but they'll never think to look inside. Oh, the legend concludes that we've been going to and fro throughout the earth. We've been climbing, digging, diving, exploring, searching for something that has always been right at the center of our own being. That omnipresence of God is inescapable, and yet we seem to lack the ability to connect with this power in the living of our lives. When we make this search high and low, over and under, much that we have engaged in is what we call the practice of the presence of God. But most often, we practice the absence of God in this forgetful state, in our spiritual amnesia. And it's a kind of devotion or prayers or speaking affirmations where we're addressing something we imagine to be outside us, beyond the margin of our own being, rather than praying from the source of God within us, speaking that affirmation to and as that essence of God, being in service and devotion to the life of God already present in us. When we move from the absence to the practice and engage in a dynamically active relationship with God, then we are beginning to express God at the point of our holy self. Sometimes we stray so far from this teaching of Jesus, this pure concept of God, that we forget how Paul, the apostle, described his everywhere presence. Paul said this, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. Since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything, yet he is not far from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being." This is a passage from Acts 17, verses 24 to 8. In him we live, we move, and we have being in the world. We only get to experience God in the world when we have the experience of God in our heart and in our being. God is where we live. This is the soup in which we swim, the ocean of water that the fish can't determine that it's in the water. It's the milieu of our life. It's the air that we float in. God is everywhere present. There is no place that we cannot find God. Our task is simply to be still and know that I am God. Be still and know the omnipresence of God, the everywhere activity of the creator of the universe. The second principle is the divinity of man. This is a discovery that Jesus made in his own lifetime, and he proved and demonstrated it in his fulfillment of the Christ principle. But this is not a discovery that was of Jesus's own or only, but it was the discovery he came to share with us, the example that we are this infinite presence and essence. John 14:12 speaks of it this way in Jesus' words, "I tell you for certain that if you have faith in me, you will do the same things that I am doing. You will even do greater things. You and I are capable of so much more than we expect or understand or realize. This God activity in us, Jesus spoke of our great capacity to live an unlimited life. So when we talk about this idea that we have the divine potential within us, we recognize that Jesus showed us what we can do. He showed us that we can go farther and reach higher and expand the potentiality that we have. And we can have faith that we can do this because He has done it. What God has done, He can do through each one of us. Just as we read in the Gospel of John, John is the most metaphysical of the books, not simply intended to be a record of the life and experiences of Jesus, but much more an interpretation of what those experiences and His words mean for us. So we delve into this to understand that He is talking about this divine potential within us to live as creatively, as expansively as Jesus did, even unto surpassing the power of death that we all fear. That there is nothing greater than the experience of God in us, lived outward. The purpose of life is to express and unfold this God self within us, this infinite potential. That same energy that was alive in Jesus is alive in us. The Apostle Paul said it this way: let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, from Philippians. This is the same idea, that the only difference is how good we are at discovering it, in employing it in our life, in expressing it through who we are. The difference between each one of us and Jesus has nothing to do with our birth, that we are contemporary to this era of life, and He was born roughly 2,000 years ago. It has not to do with our upbringing. There is nothing to know other than that we already hold this light of the Christ principle within us, and we are called to put that light into service. There's this legend about the General Electric company that their scientific team, whenever they had a new team member come on board, they had a little ritual. They had a little fun with the new guy. And they would tell him that his first job to get oriented into the company was to frost the inside of the light bulbs. Now, this began quite some time ago. Some of us are old enough to remember bulbs with no frost and just clear, how intense that light was. I'm not, but my family bought an old cabin on a lake in Washington State, and it was so old that it had clear light bulbs, right? Yeah. So this young man, excited to make his mark on his first assignment with his team, set about putting frosting, how to frost the inside of the light bulb. Now, at that time, this was kind of the equivalent of, going to get out of the supply closet a shelf stretcher or a sky hook, all of those not so real kind of assignments that some of us have been indoctrinated with in some environments, hazed a little. Well, this young man believed he could do it. They didn't tell him that this was a joke. They just set him to the task. And with diligence, we now have frosted bulbs because one young scientist didn't believe that this could happen. Did not believe this could happen. Where are my double negatives there? And so the idea is that he surpassed the expectation held by everybody else, believed to be the truth. Now, we've seen examples of this willingness to not be limited in our potential through our lifetime. We've watched a man step on the moon. We've watched diseases that began across the 20th century with no ability to be stemmed come under control through the power of science applying knowledge to that problem until a vaccine could be created. We're living that experience right now. Can our human intelligence pull from the unlimited intelligence of the universe to create a solution for a problem confronting mankind at a huge level? Yes, we can. Yes, we always have. And yes, there will be examples in the future of our ability to live beyond what we think of as the confines of our human intelligence, our human ability. And that knowing comes to us through this understanding that God is present and alive in us. This is the concept of the divinity of man. The third principle we'll look at is the creative power of thought. Our mind is a linking mechanism to the mind of God to connect us, the link between human and the infinite. We must utilize our thoughts to connect to this God essence, rather than simply using our thoughts and our words to express our reaction to things in the world. Let us reach to that high place where Brahma hid our own divinity. Let us search and find and use the thoughts that allow us to be positive, creative, powerful beings, because we are thinking the thoughts of God, as Einstein sought after. There was a philosopher in the late 1800s, a gentleman named Elbert Hubbard, who said, "Man is not what he thinks he is, but what he thinks he is." So allow us to use that tool. Our lives, we are now reflecting whatever it is we have held in our mind. Whatever our thoughts have been are now the cumulative effect that we are living. And so if we're not happy about where we are, the good news is we hold this gift of the creative power of thought to be the creative energy of our lives, to shift where we are from any given moment into some new experience that we would prefer. If you're not satisfied where you are, then begin today in your thought to build a new consciousness. As Paul wrote, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind," from Romans 12:2. Jesus spoke over and over this idea that the power of our mind connected to the energy of God was our creative purpose, our creative principle, our ability to transcend whatever circumstances and conditions we find ourselves in. So I invite you to observe your thoughts. Grasp where your thoughts have been carrying you so that you can choose what you wish to create from this moment forward. To have the kind of experiences and conditions in your life that you prefer to be moving through. And to know that if it's not looking like you want it right now, there is good news that God is always present in the midst of this and ready to respond to your transcendent power, to your divinity, because God is present at the point of view. In this very real sense, our thoughts determine who we become. And we chart our own course because we live our life from the inside out. We tend to get trapped in the idea that life is happening to us when we are the creative force of our life. And when we remember and stand in that truth, we shift everything in our life and in our world into something of higher purpose, into something infinitely sacred, into that holy purpose that each of us is called to live. So this is the beginning of our journey into consciousness conditioning. When we accept this idea these several simple ideas that there is only God. There is only God. I am a reflection of that truth, that presence, that activity. And I shape my world through the creative power of my own thinking. So let me move my thinking Godward in every moment so that I stand in that holy place. This journey, this next 10 weeks in spirit groups, is undertaking to embed that thinking in us wholly and completely. So spirit groups move through a process of a 10-week journey. The first week is introduction. We all get acquainted. We see where we're going. We make some plans to chart our spiritual growth in the coming weeks. Then we enjoy some instruction from this book, Discover the Power Within You, in video form with Reverend Michael Gott, whom you almost got to see. Michael is the senior minister at Unity of Houston, and he's a gifted teacher, a gifted interpreter of Eric Butterworth in our movement, and he's a gifted musician. So I'm pretty sure every session might have a song, Michael at the piano, and sharing perhaps his own composition. And then, as Thomas and Reverend Johanna mentioned, we get together in each group and we choose a service project, something to put that activity of God through us into the world. It might be something you can do here in the church community. It might be something you choose to serve the greater community. And we're probably trying to find a creative way to do that, mostly in a virtual sense right now, given that our meetings are virtual and life is a lot more virtual right now than some limited gathering in person. We're always grateful for those of you who choose to be with us on Sundays. It's exciting to have that hope that we can return to really being in community, face to face, as well as heart to heart. And we're also grateful for that virtual community to allow us to continue this process of being in connection. And then part of building community is having some fun together. So 1 week is dedicated to simply having some sort of social, fun, playful, enlivening activity. And then we all come together in week 10 to celebrate this journey that we've been on and then look forward. That's the flow of spirit groups that we are inviting you into. So find that information page on our website and check out what this is about and be part of being in community in a deeper way, in a new experience. You know, this is not a novel idea, small group ministry. Unity has been engaged in small group ministry pretty much throughout its whole essence, was founded on the basis of prayer ministry, gathering in Myrtle and Charles' living room in a small group. Even before that, Jesus assembled a small group in his ministry and worked together to change lives in that era, and that the effect of that small group ministry has been changing lives literally for centuries. So we invite you into your own life-changing journey with us, with partners, to claim and discover your own higher truth of your being. Now is the time for you to locate yourself in God and know that God is located at the point of you. This is our strength, our truth, our own divinity. Blessings.